I never saw it coming. Looking back now, maybe I should have. Maybe the warning signs were there all along, small, almost imperceptible at first, like cracks in the foundation of a house. But it wasn't until the house collapsed that I realized how fragile everything had become. 40 years of marriage. That's a lifetime, isn't it? At least it felt like one. Peter and I had built our life together, weathered every storm that came our way. We raised 2 children, sent them off into the world, and settled into what we thought would be our quiet, uneventful retirement. But life, I've learned, is rarely as simple as that. Beneath the surface, beneath the comfortable routines and familiar rhythms of our days, something else was stirring, something dangerous. It started innocently enough. Doesn't it always? I didn't wake up one day and decide to throw away everything Peter and I had. No, it crept up on me slowly, like a shadow growing longer as the sun sets. And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. This is not a story about love. This is a story about betrayal, about how one decision can shatter everything you thought you knew, about yourself, about the people you love, about the life you've built. It's about what happens when desire leads you down a path you never intended to follow, and how sometimes the consequences of that path are far more than you ever imagined. Peter and I had always been a team. That's what I told myself anyway. We met when we were both in our early 20s, young, idealistic, full of dreams for the future. He was studying to become an architect while I was working as a school teacher. We fell in love quickly, the kind of love that sweeps you off your feet before you even know what's happening. We married a year later, bought a house in a quiet suburb, and settled into what I thought was the perfect life. We had 2 children, Andrew and Emily, who became the center of our world. And for years, everything felt right. We had our ups and downs, of course, what marriage doesn't. But we always found our way back to each other. Now, at 68, we were retired, enjoying the quieter pace of life that comes with age. We spent our days puttering around the house, tending to the garden, visiting friends, and occasionally taking trips to see the kids and our 3 grandchildren. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable, safe. And maybe that was the problem. The day I met Ryan was like any other. I had volunteered to help organize a charity auction at the local community center, something I did a few times a year to keep busy. It was nothing glamorous, sorting donations, setting up tables, chatting with other volunteers. I enjoyed it. It gave me a sense of purpose, something to do while Peter busied himself with his endless home improvement projects. Ryan was one of the newer volunteers. He was younger, much younger, probably in his mid-20s, though he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made him seem older. He worked as a personal trainer, which explained his athletic build and easy charm. When I first saw him, I thought nothing of it. He was just another face in the crowd, another volunteer helping out for the day. But then we ended up working together on a project, setting up the tables for the event. We started chatting, about nothing in particular, really. The weather, the town, how long we'd been volunteering. It was casual, easy conversation, but there was something about the way he spoke, the way he smiled, that made me feel different. It wasn't until later that evening, as I sat at home with Peter, that I realized I was still thinking about Ryan. It was a fleeting thought, a brief moment of distraction, but it lingered longer than it should have. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. After all, what could it possibly be? I was 68 years old, happily married, and long past the age of chasing after foolish dreams. But the next week, when I saw Ryan again at the community center, that feeling returned. This time it was stronger. He greeted me with a smile that sent a small, unexpected thrill through me, and as we worked together on another project, I found myself drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just that he was young and handsome, though he was, undeniably. It was something else. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. He made me feel seen, noticed, in a way that Peter hadn't in a long time. It's hard to explain the shift that happens when you've been married for as long as I have. At some point, you stop being lovers and start being partners, companions in the truest sense of the word. Peter and I had our routines, our habits. We knew each other inside and out, but the spark, the passion, had faded over time. I told myself that was normal, that it was just a part of growing older together. But now, with Ryan, I felt something different. It was a spark, a flicker of excitement that I hadn't even realized I'd been missing, and that terrified me. I told myself it was nothing. It was just a crush, a harmless fantasy that would fade away as quickly as it had appeared. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I knew I was playing with fire, and if I wasn't careful, I would get burned. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I continued volunteering at the community center, and each time I saw Ryan, the tension between us grew stronger. It was subtle at first. An extra glance, a smile that lingered a little too long, the brush of his hand against mine as we worked together. But it was there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it would boil over. I tried to push it away, to focus on Peter and our life together. But every time I saw Ryan, that thrill returned, stronger than before. And the more I tried to ignore it, the harder it became to resist. One afternoon, after we had finished setting up for an event, Ryan offered to walk me to my car. It was a small gesture, something he had done before, but this time it felt different. As we walked together in the quiet parking lot, I could feel the tension building between us, thick and heavy in the air. When we reached my car, Ryan hesitated for a moment, as if he was unsure of what to say. Then finally he spoke. "I've enjoyed working with you, Sylvia," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You're different from anyone I've met before." My heart raced, and I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. I should have thanked him and left, but instead I stood there frozen, caught in the web of my own emotions. And then, before I could stop myself, I said the words that would change everything. "I've enjoyed it too." It was a simple sentence, but it was loaded with meaning. Ryan looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and in that moment, I knew that we had crossed a line. There was no going back now. It didn't happen right away. For weeks I wrestled with the guilt, the shame of what I was feeling. Every time I saw Ryan, I felt a mix of excitement and dread, knowing that I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. But I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to him, like a moth to a flame, unable to resist the pull of his charm. And then, one afternoon, it happened. We had finished working on a project at the community center, and as usual, Ryan offered to walk me to my car. But this time, instead of saying goodbye and leaving, we lingered. The parking lot was empty, the sun beginning to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet that seemed to envelop us, and in that moment, I knew that something was about to happen. Ryan turned to me, his expression serious, his eyes full of intensity. "Sylvia," he began, his voice low and steady, "I need to tell you something." I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what he was going to say, but I knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know this is wrong, but I can't help it. I'm drawn to you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I was speechless. I had been feeling the same way, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't expected. "Ryan, we can't," I began, but he cut me off. "I know," he said, his voice full of anguish. "I know this is crazy, but I can't pretend anymore. I want you, Sylvia." I should have walked away. I should have told him that this was a mistake, that we could never be anything more than friends. But instead, I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing with 1,000 conflicting emotions. And then, before I could stop myself, I did the one thing I had promised myself I would never do. I kissed him. The moment our lips touched, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. There was a brief second where everything felt suspended in time, the world fading away as the warmth of Ryan's kiss washed over me. But as soon as it was over, reality crashed back down, harder than I had ever expected. I pulled away, my heart racing, guilt flooding through me like a tidal wave. "What have I done?" I whispered, almost to myself. Ryan looked at me, his eyes full of conflicting emotions. "Sylvia, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push you." I stepped back, needing space, needing air. "No, it's my fault. I shouldn't have let this happen. I'm married, Ryan. We can't do this." He nodded, but I could see the struggle in his face. "I know. I never wanted to hurt you or get in the way of your life, but I didn't let him finish. It was a mistake. We have to forget about this." Ryan's face fell, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might try to convince me that what had happened between us wasn't a mistake at all, but instead he simply nodded, his eyes sad but resigned. "If that's what you want." It was the only thing I could say, the only way to salvage what was left of my dignity. But as I drove home that evening, the weight of my guilt pressed down on me like a stone. How could I have let this happen? How had I allowed myself to be pulled into something so reckless, so dangerous? When I arrived home, Peter was in the living room watching television. He glanced up as I entered, giving me the same warm smile he always did. "Hey, how was the community center today?" he asked, his voice cheerful, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I forced a smile, my heart aching with guilt. "It was fine," I lied, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "Just the usual stuff." Peter didn't seem to notice my unease. He returned his attention to the TV, and I made my way to the kitchen, my mind spinning. I had to stop this. I had to end whatever was happening between Ryan and me before it destroyed everything Peter and I had built together. But it wasn't as simple as I thought it would be. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and guilt. I tried to avoid Ryan as much as possible, keeping my distance at the community center, avoiding eye contact, avoiding any conversations that went beyond the bare minimum. But it was harder than I expected. The pull I felt toward him hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had grown stronger. Every time I saw him, that same electric thrill surged through me, no matter how much I tried to push it away, and I could tell that Ryan felt the same. He didn't say anything, didn't push, but I could see it in his eyes, the longing, the unspoken desire that simmered just below the surface. It was a dangerous game we were playing, and I knew that if I didn't put a stop to it, things would spiral out of control. Then, one afternoon, it all came crashing down. I had stayed late at the community center to help clean up after an event. Most of the other volunteers had already left, and I was alone in the storage room, stacking chairs and organizing supplies. I thought I was alone anyway. But then I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned around, Ryan was standing in the doorway. "Ryan," I said, my voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine. "I needed to see you. I can't stop thinking about you, Sylvia." I felt a rush of panic. "Ryan, we can't do this. I told you it was a mistake." But he stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "It didn't feel like a mistake to me, and I don't think it did to you either." I took a step back, my heart racing. "Ryan, please, we have to stop this before it goes too far." But instead of stopping, he closed the distance between us, his hand reaching out to touch mine. And in that moment, all the rational thoughts I had been clinging to evaporated. The pull was too strong, the desire too overwhelming. I kissed him again. This time there was no hesitation, no doubt. It was reckless, dangerous, and exhilarating all at once. And for a moment, I let myself get lost in it, let myself believe that I could have this, that I could somehow balance the life I had with Peter and the secret I was now sharing with Ryan. But as soon as it was over, the guilt came crashing back. "I have to go," I whispered, pulling away and grabbing my bag. "I can't do this." Ryan reached for me, his voice desperate. "Sylvia, please." But I didn't let him finish. I rushed out of the building, my heart pounding, tears stinging my eyes. What had I done? How had I let this happen again? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with guilt and shame. Peter was sleeping soundly beside me, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I felt sick with the weight of my betrayal, knowing that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The next morning, I made a decision. I would end it. For good this time. No more secret meetings, no more stolen kisses. I would tell Ryan that it was over, that we could never see each other again outside of our work at the community center. It was the only way to save what was left of my marriage, the only way to stop the guilt from consuming me entirely. But life, as I would soon learn, has a way of unraveling even the best-laid plans. I planned to meet Ryan at the community center that afternoon to end things once and for all. But before I could leave the house, Peter stopped me. "Sylvia," he said, his voice calm but serious, "we need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. Had he found out? Did he know? "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Peter sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About our life." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Was this it? Was this the moment he would confront me about the affair? "I know we've been distant," he continued, his eyes filled with concern. "I know things haven't been the same between us for a while now." I felt a lump form in my throat. He didn't know. He wasn't confronting me about Ryan. He was just trying to make sense of the changes between us. "I don't want to lose you, Sylvia," Peter said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I love you, and I don't know where we went wrong, but I want to fix it. I want us to be close again." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt the full weight of my guilt crashing down on me. Peter was a good man. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve the betrayal I had brought into our marriage. "I love you too," I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Peter. For everything." He smiled gently, reaching out to take my hand. "It's not too late, Sylvia. We can work through this. We can fix things." I nodded, though my heart was breaking. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could go back to the way things were, that we could somehow repair the damage that had been done. But deep down, I knew the truth. The affair with Ryan had changed everything, and there was no going back. Still, I promised myself that I would try. I would end things with Ryan and focus on rebuilding my marriage with Peter. It was the only way to move forward. When I arrived at the community center that afternoon, Ryan was already waiting for me. I could see the hope in his eyes as I approached, but I knew what I had to do. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. He nodded, his expression serious. "I know." "I can't do this anymore, Ryan," I continued, my heart heavy with the words. "We can't see each other like this. I love my husband, and I can't keep betraying him." Ryan's face fell, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might try to convince me to stay with him. But instead, he simply nodded, his eyes filled with sadness. "I understand," he said quietly. "I don't want to hurt you, Sylvia. I never did." "I know," I whispered. "But it has to end." He looked away, his jaw clenched. I thought maybe we had something real." "We did," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But it's over now. It has to be." The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken emotions. And as I turned to leave, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. I had ended the affair, but the consequences of my actions were far from over. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my relationship with Peter. I focused on spending more time with him, reconnecting in ways we hadn't in years. And for a while, it seemed to be working. We were talking more, laughing more, finding small moments of joy in each other's company. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the guilt. It gnawed at me constantly, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. I had ended the affair with Ryan, but the damage had already been done. And as much as I wanted to move on, I couldn't escape the consequences of my actions. Then, one evening, the phone rang. I answered it, expecting it to be one of the kids or a friend, but the voice on the other end of the line wasn't familiar. "Sylvia Andrews?" the voice asked, cold and unfamiliar. "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding. "Who is this?" There was a pause, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a chilling edge. "You've made a mistake, Sylvia. A big one." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The line went dead. The phone call haunted me for days. I replayed it over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of who it could have been and what they meant. "You've made a mistake." Those words echoed in my head, filling me with dread. Had someone found out about the affair with Ryan? Was this a sick prank? Or was there something far more dangerous lurking in the shadows? I told no one about the call, not even Peter. He had been so kind, so patient as we worked to rebuild our relationship, and I didn't want to drag him into whatever mess I had created with Ryan. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a wrong number or a random cruel prank, but deep down, I knew better. And then, the second phone call came. It was a Thursday evening, and Peter was out visiting an old friend. I was alone in the house, sitting on the couch with a book in my lap when the phone rang again. My heart leaped into my throat as I reached for the phone, my hands trembling. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the same cold voice I had heard before. "I warned you, Sylvia." My heart raced, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Who are you? What do you want?" "You thought you could hide your little secret," the voice continued, calm but menacing. "But secrets have a way of coming out." I stood up, panic rising in my chest. "What do you want from me? Money? Is this blackmail?" The voice chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "Oh, Sylvia, this isn't about money. This is about you paying for what you've done. People always pay, one way or another." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to figure out who it could be. Was it Lila, Ryan's girlfriend? Had she found out about the affair? Or was it Ryan himself, trying to manipulate me into some twisted game? No. Ryan had been hurt when I ended things, but he wasn't capable of something like this. He wasn't cruel. But whoever this was, they knew. And they wanted something from me. Something far worse than money. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Don't worry," the voice said softly. "You'll find out soon enough." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling. Whoever this person was, they knew about the affair, and now they were threatening me. But why? What did they want? And how had they found out? The next few days passed in a blur of fear and paranoia. I couldn't stop thinking about the phone calls, couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I started to notice small things, footsteps outside the house at night, a car parked down the street that seemed to always be there. At first I thought I was imagining things, that the stress of the affair and the guilt were making me paranoid. But the more I noticed, the more I began to realize that this was real. Someone was watching me. Someone was waiting. I considered going to the police, but what could I say? That I'd had an affair, and now someone was threatening me? They would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer, questions that could destroy everything I had worked to rebuild with Peter. Instead, I decided to confront the one person who might have answers, Ryan. I found Ryan at the gym where he worked as a personal trainer. He looked surprised to see me, but there was a hint of something else in his expression. Concern, maybe, or guilt. "Sylvia," he said, his voice hesitant. "What are you doing here? I thought I need to talk to you," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Now." Ryan led me to a quiet corner of the gym, away from the clients and other trainers. His eyes were filled with confusion, but I didn't have time to ease into the conversation. "Have you told anyone about us?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan's eyes widened. "What? No, I haven't told anyone. Why would I?" I studied his face, searching for any sign that he was lying, but he looked genuinely confused and worried. "Someone knows," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I've been getting phone calls, threats. They know about us, Ryan." Ryan's expression darkened, and he stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Sylvia, I swear to you I didn't tell anyone. I would never do that." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, but the fear gnawing at me was relentless. "Then how do they know?" I asked, my voice cracking. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "I don't know. But we have to figure this out. Did they say what they wanted?" They just said I made a mistake. That I would pay for what I'd done." Ryan clenched his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes. "This has to be Lila," he said, almost to himself. "She must have found out. But no, she wouldn't do this." "Ryan," I said, my voice trembling, "if Lila found out, we have to deal with it before this gets any worse." Ryan shook his head. "Lila wouldn't hurt you like that. She's not vindictive. She would confront me before she did something like this." I wasn't sure if I believed him. "Then who? Who could it be?" He didn't have an answer, and I felt my chest tighten with fear. Ryan reached out and took my hand, his eyes pleading. "Sylvia, we'll figure this out. I promise." But his promises felt hollow, and as I left the gym that day, the fear continued to gnaw at me, relentless and unyielding. Whoever was behind this was out there, waiting, and I didn't know how to stop them. A week passed with no further phone calls, but the unease that had settled over me didn't fade. I found myself jumping at every sound, every shadow that crossed my path. Even Peter had noticed my anxiety, though I had done my best to hide it. "Is everything all right?" Peter asked one evening as we sat together on the couch. He placed his hand gently on mine, his brow furrowed in concern. I forced a smile, though my heart was racing. "Yes, everything's fine. Just a little tired." Peter studied me for a moment, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made the guilt twist even tighter in my chest. He had been so kind, so forgiving as we worked to repair our marriage, and here I was, keeping another secret from him. The thought of confessing everything to him crossed my mind, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy him like that, but the peace I had hoped for never came. The following day, I received an envelope in the mail. There was no return address, no name, just my own name written in neat, careful handwriting on the front. My heart raced as I tore open the envelope, my hands trembling. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me and Ryan, taken the day we kissed in the parking lot behind the community center. We were standing close, our faces inches apart, lost in the moment. The evidence of my betrayal was clear, undeniable. I gasped, dropping the photograph as if it had burned me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Whoever had taken this photo had been watching us. They had seen everything, and now they were using it against me. The note inside the envelope was brief, written in the same neat handwriting as the address on the front. "I told you there would be consequences." I stared at the note, my hands shaking. Whoever this was, they were serious, and now they had proof. Proof that could destroy my marriage, my reputation, everything. I had no choice. I had to confront Ryan again. But more than that, I had to consider the terrifying possibility that the person behind this was closer than I thought. When I arrived at the gym to confront Ryan again, he was already waiting for me, as if he'd been expecting me. His face was pale, and I could tell from the tension in his expression that something had changed. Before I could even speak, he held up his phone, showing me a text message he had received. It was the same photograph, the one of us kissing in the parking lot. "They sent this to me," Ryan said, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know who it is, Sylvia, but they're watching us." My blood ran cold. "What do they want?" Ryan shook his head. "They haven't said yet, but we need to figure out who this is before they do something worse." My mind raced. Who could it be? Lila, perhaps, though Ryan insisted she wouldn't do something like this. Peter? No. Peter had no idea. But someone knew. Someone had been watching, and now they were closing in. "Maybe it's someone from the community center," Ryan suggested, though he sounded unsure. "Maybe someone saw us and—" "I don't know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But we have to stop this." Ryan nodded, his face set with determination. "We'll figure it out. We have to." But as I left the gym that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late.
It's strange how the quiet moments in life can carry so much weight. That night, I didn't think twice about staying behind to clean up. Leonard had already left, tired and grumbling about his back, and Jeremy had offered to stay and help. It seemed innocent enough, two people finishing a long day's work. But by the time the tables were cleared and the lights were dimmed, something had shifted. My name is Victoria Hargrave, and I'm 56 years old. I've been married to Leonard for 12 years, and for most of that time I've dedicated myself to our small event planning business. It's not glamorous work, but it's fulfilling in its own way. Leonard's son, Jeremy, is 30. He's been living with us for the past few months after being laid off, and while he's always been polite, there's a distance between us. He's never quite forgiven his father for remarrying so soon after his mother's death, and I've always been careful not to overstep my boundaries. That night, though, something changed. It was the kind of moment that sneaks up on you, quiet and unassuming, until it's too late to turn back. This is the story of how one late night changed everything, and how the choices I made that night unraveled the life I thought I knew. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment my marriage to Leonard started to feel like an arrangement rather than a partnership. Maybe it was the third time he left me to deal with a disgruntled client because he'd rather focus on perfecting his golf swing. Or maybe it was when he stopped asking how my day went and started grunting in acknowledgement instead. To outsiders, our marriage probably looked fine. Comfortable, even. Leonard and I shared a decent life, a modestly successful event planning business, a lovely home in a quiet suburb, and the kind of predictability that some people might envy. But beneath the surface, there was a void that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. That void became more pronounced when Jeremy moved back in. Jeremy was Leonard's son from his first marriage, a handsome but guarded man of 30 who carried himself with a quiet intensity. He had his mother's dark hair and sharp features, but his temperament was more like Leonard's, stoic and occasionally sharp-tongued. When I first met Jeremy years ago, he'd been polite but distant, shaking my hand with a perfunctory smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Over the years, we'd shared little more than pleasantries, and I'd always felt like I was walking on eggshells around him. So, when Leonard told me Jeremy was moving in for a while after losing his job, I was apprehensive, to say the least. "It's just until he gets back on his feet," Leonard had assured me, as though that would make the transition any easier. Of course, I'd said, forcing a smile, he's family. But family was a complicated word in our household. Jeremy moved into the guest room with little fanfare, bringing only a couple of suitcases and a distant air that made it clear he wasn't thrilled to be there. I tried to make him feel welcome, cooking his favorite meals and asking about his plans, but his responses were always short and guarded. "Thanks," he'd say when I served dinner, or, "not sure yet," when I asked about his job prospects. Leonard, for his part, seemed content to leave Jeremy to his own devices. He'd occasionally offer vague words of encouragement, "You'll land on your feet, son," before retreating to his office or the golf course. That left me to navigate the awkwardness of living with a stepson who seemed more like a house guest than family. The family reunion event was Leonard's idea, part of his ongoing effort to maintain appearances as the patriarch of a close-knit family. It was also, predictably, left to me to plan. Just something simple. Leonard had said when he first floated the idea, a barbecue, maybe. Nothing too fancy. But nothing Leonard ever asked for was truly simple. The guest list ballooned from 10 people to 30, and what started as a casual barbecue morphed into a full-blown catered affair, complete with rented tables and decorations. Jeremy, to my surprise, offered to help. "I've got time," he said when I asked if he'd be willing to pitch in. "Might as well make myself useful." I was skeptical at first, but he proved to be more capable than I'd expected. He helped set up tables, string lights across the backyard, and even wrangled the caterers when they arrived late. "You're a natural at this," I said at one point, handing him a glass of water as we stood by the grill. He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess I learned a thing or two from my mom. She loved hosting parties." The mention of his mother caught me off guard, and I wasn't sure how to respond. "She would have liked you," he added after a moment, his tone softening. I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or a strange sense of validation. "Thank you," I said quietly. The day of the reunion was a blur of activity. Guests arrived in droves, filling the backyard with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Leonard basked in the attention, regaling everyone with stories about his time in the military and his semi-retirement as a businessman. Jeremy, meanwhile, slipped into the background, helping out wherever he was needed without drawing attention to himself. "You've raised a good son," one of Leonard's cousins said to me at one point, mistaking my role in Jeremy's life. I smiled politely, resisting the urge to correct her. By the time the last guest left, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the backyard was littered with empty plates and crumpled napkins. Leonard predictably excused himself to lie down for a bit, leaving Jeremy and me to handle the cleanup. "I can do this on my own," I said as I started stacking plates. "It's fine," Jeremy replied, grabbing a trash bag. "I don't mind." For a while, we worked in silence, the occasional clink of glass or rustle of trash the only sounds breaking the stillness. "You're good at this," I said after a while, nodding toward the string of fairy lights he was carefully taking down. He shrugged. "It's just cleanup." "No, I mean, you're good with people, organizing things. You have a natural knack for it." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Thanks, that's nice to hear." As the night wore on, the atmosphere between us shifted. It was subtle at first, a shared laugh when I tripped over a stray chair, a fleeting glance that lingered a second too long. "Why do you put up with him?" Jeremy asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "My dad," he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite identify. "He doesn't exactly make your life easy." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "He's not a bad man," I said finally. "He just has his flaws." Jeremy snorted. "That's putting it lightly." I set down the plates I was holding, crossing my arms over my chest. "He's your father," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "And he loves you." "Maybe," Jeremy replied, his gaze dropping to the ground. "But he sure has a funny way of showing it." The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard, and I felt an inexplicable urge to comfort him. "You're allowed to be angry," I said softly. "But don't let it consume you. You're better than that." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something else I couldn't quite name. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Then, almost instinctively, I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be okay, Jeremy," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told me he believed me. By the time we finished cleaning up, the clock on the kitchen wall read 11:42 p.m. The house was eerily quiet, with Leonard long since retired to the bedroom and the lingering hum of voices from the reunion fading into memory. Jeremy and I stood in the kitchen, the countertop between us piled with dishes waiting to be washed. "You should head to bed," I said, gesturing toward the hallway. "I can finish this up." Jeremy shook his head, wiping his hands on a towel. "You've done enough for one day. Let me help." There was no point in arguing. Once Jeremy made up his mind about something, he didn't budge, a trait I admired even if it occasionally frustrated me. "Suit yourself," I said, grabbing a sponge and turning on the faucet. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, the sound of running water and clinking dishes filling the space between us. Every now and then, our hands brushed as we reached for the same plate or utensil, and each time I felt a strange jolt of awareness. "You know," Jeremy said after a while, his voice breaking the quiet, "tonight wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be." I glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, and what were you expecting?" he smirked, shrugging. "Lots of awkward small talk, people asking me what I'm doing with my life, the usual." I laughed softly, setting a clean glass on the drying rack. "You handled it well." "Thanks," he said, his tone sincere. "But that's mostly because of you." I blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Yeah," he said, rinsing a plate. "You kept things running smoothly, made everyone feel welcome. You've got a way of making things easier." For a moment I didn't know how to respond. "That's kind of you to say," I said finally, my voice softer than I intended. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "It's just the truth." The air between us shifted then, becoming heavier, more charged. I busied myself with the dishes, my heart pounding as I tried to ignore the way his words made me feel. "Do you ever get tired of it?" he asked suddenly. I frowned, looking up. "Tired of what?" "Doing everything for everyone," he said, gesturing toward the pile of dishes. "Keeping this place running, putting up with my dad. Doesn't it ever get to you?" His question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But that's just how life is, isn't it? You do what needs to be done." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "That's not how it should be. You deserve more than that." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch, and for a moment I couldn't look away from him. "Jeremy," I began, but the words faltered on my tongue. The sound of a glass slipping from his hand and clattering into the sink broke the tension. "Sorry," he muttered, his cheeks flushing as he reached for the glass. "It's fine," I said quickly, grateful for the distraction. But the moment lingered, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying. We finished the dishes in silence, the weight of our earlier conversation hanging over us like a cloud. When the last plate was put away, I turned to him, wiping my hands on a towel. "Thank you for staying to help," I said, my voice steadier now. He nodded, leaning against the counter. "Of course, I couldn't just leave you to do it all." I smiled, though it felt shaky. "Good night, Jeremy." "Good night," he replied, his gaze lingering on me for a beat longer than necessary. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as Leonard snored softly beside me. My mind was racing, replaying every word, every look, every moment of the evening. Jeremy's words echoed in my mind. "You deserve more than that." No one had ever said that to me before. Not Leonard, not anyone. And hearing it from Jeremy of all people felt both startling and comforting. I tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a kind gesture from someone trying to express gratitude. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The following morning I woke early, hoping to shake off the lingering tension from the night before. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing coffee and mentally running through the day's to-do list. Jeremy appeared in the doorway just as I was pouring my second cup. He looked tired, his hair mussed and his t-shirt slightly wrinkled. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, handing him a mug. He accepted it with a small smile, leaning against the counter as he took a sip. For a while, we stood there in silence, the tension between us simmering just beneath the surface. "About last night," he said finally, setting his mug down. I froze, my pulse quickening. What about it? He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, I said quickly, though my voice wavered slightly. He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine. Are you sure? Yes, I said, though the word felt fragile, like it might break under the weight of everything I wasn't saying. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the garden, pruning the rose bushes that lined the edge of the yard. It was one of the few things that brought me a sense of peace, a way to quiet my restless mind. Jeremy appeared at the edge of the garden, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jeans. Need help? He asked, his tone casual. I hesitated, then nodded. Sure, grab those clippers. We worked in tandem, the quiet hum of the garden filling the space between us. Every now and then, our hands brushed as we reached for the same branch, and each time I felt that same electric jolt. At one point he paused, wiping sweat from his brow as he looked around the garden. This is nice, he said. Peaceful. It's my sanctuary, I admitted, glancing at him. I can see why, he said, his gaze softening. We stood there for a moment, the sunlight filtering through the trees and casting dappled shadows on the ground. The air was warm, the scent of roses heavy around us. Thank you, he said suddenly, his voice quiet. For what? I asked, surprised. For everything, he said, his eyes meeting mine. For putting up with me, for being here. I don't say it enough, but I appreciate you. His words caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. You don't have to thank me, Jeremy, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Yes, I do, he insisted, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of us standing there in the garden. I could feel the warmth of his presence, the intensity of his gaze, and the weight of everything unspoken between us. Jeremy, I began, but before I could finish, he took a step closer. Victoria, he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't quite name. My breath caught, my heart pounding as I realized just how close we were standing. I should go, I said abruptly, stepping back and breaking the spell. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Yeah, me too. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Guilt, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. Whatever was happening between us, I knew it wasn't over. The days that followed were a blur of routine tasks and forced normalcy. But underneath it all, the air in the house felt different. Heavier. Charged. Jeremy and I danced around each other like strangers in a shared space, our conversations polite but brief, our interactions careful to the point of being stilted. I threw myself into work for the business, organizing invoices, corresponding with clients, and planning the next event. Anything to keep myself busy, to stop my mind from wandering back to the moments we had shared. But avoidance only works for so long. One morning, Leonard sat at the dining table, his coffee cup in one hand and his tablet in the other, skimming through news articles as he often did before heading off to his golf club. He glanced up at me, his expression distant but mildly curious. You seem different lately, he said, gesturing vaguely with his free hand. I froze for a fraction of a second, quickly masking my unease with a tight smile. Different how? I don't know, he replied with a shrug. Busier maybe, a little quieter. Everything okay? Of course, I lied, my tone practiced. Just a lot on my plate with the business. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his tablet, already distracted by whatever headline had caught his attention. I envied his obliviousness. It must be nice, I thought, to live in a world where everything feels simple, where the people around you can spiral into chaos and you don't even notice. Later that afternoon, I found myself back in the garden, pruning the rose bushes that had grown unruly over the past week. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, and the faint hum of bees filled the air. I was so absorbed in my task that I didn't hear Jeremy approach until he was standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. Need help again? He asked, his tone light but his expression cautious. For a moment I considered saying no. But I didn't. Sure, I said, stepping aside to make room for him. Grab the clippers. We worked in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. Every now and then, I would catch him glancing at me out of the corner of my eye, his expression unreadable. Finally, he broke the silence. You've been avoiding me, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I straightened, turning to face him. I haven't been avoiding you, I said quickly, though even I didn't believe it. He raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms over his chest. Really? Because it feels like you can't even look me in the eye anymore. His words hit harder than I expected, and I felt my defenses begin to crack. It's not that simple, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Then explain it to me, he said, taking a step closer, because I don't understand what's happening here. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The truth felt too dangerous, too messy, but I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was wrong. Jeremy, I began, but the words caught in my throat. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not trying to make this harder for you. But I can't keep walking on eggshells around you, wondering what I did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, I said quickly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Then what is it? He pressed, his voice softer now. Why does it feel like everything's changed between us? Because it has, I wanted to say. Because I can't stop thinking about you. But I couldn't say that. Instead, I shook my head, turning away from him. I think you should leave, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What? He asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. This, I said, gesturing vaguely between us. Whatever this is, it can't happen. You need to leave before it gets worse. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, he nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. If that's what you want, he said quietly. It is, I lied. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the garden with the roses and my racing thoughts. That evening, Leonard came home earlier than usual, his mood unusually cheerful. He poured himself a drink and settled into the living room, regaling me with stories about his golf game and the friends he'd seen at the club. I nodded along, smiling in all the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. Jeremy didn't join us for dinner. When I asked Leonard if he'd seen him, he shrugged. Probably out with friends or something. You know how he is. But I knew better. Jeremy didn't have friends in town, not anymore. He was avoiding me, just as I'd told him to. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter, scrawled in Jeremy's familiar handwriting. I'll be staying with a friend for a few days. Don't worry about me. The note was short and to the point, but it felt like a punch to the gut. I clutched it in my hands, my chest tightening as a wave of guilt washed over me. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? For him to leave? To give us both some space to figure things out, but now that he was gone, the house felt unbearably empty. It was 2 days later when I got the call. I was in the middle of organizing paperwork for an upcoming event when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and froze when I saw Jeremy's name. Hello? I answered, my voice trembling slightly. It's me, he said, his voice rough. I didn't know who else to call. What's wrong? I asked, my heart pounding. I'm fine, he said quickly. It's just, I had a fight with my dad. I frowned, confused. When? Earlier today, he admitted. He came to the place I'm staying and started going off about how I'm not pulling my weight, how I'm just using you to keep a roof over my head. I couldn't take it anymore. His words made my chest tighten with anger. Jeremy, that's not true, I said firmly. You've been helping out more than anyone. Try telling him that, he said bitterly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. I shouldn't have called. I just needed someone to talk to. I'm glad you did, I said softly. By the time we hung up, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't fix everything, but I could at least try to make things right between Jeremy and Leonard. Or so I thought. Jeremy's call lingered in my mind, long after we hung up. His voice, raw with frustration and exhaustion, played on repeat in my thoughts, each word laced with something I couldn't ignore. Anger, vulnerability, and a kind of loneliness that mirrored my own. Leonard, oblivious as always, went about his days as if nothing had changed. He had his routines. Golf in the mornings, a scotch in the evenings, and the occasional burst of enthusiasm when a business idea struck him. He'd been home less frequently lately, throwing himself into plans for a new venture. Something about luxury short-term rentals that he thought could make him rich overnight. It's gonna be huge, he said over dinner one night, his tone animated. I've got the connections, and people are desperate for exclusive stays these days. That sounds great, I replied, my voice devoid of any real enthusiasm. He didn't notice. Jeremy's absence had created a vacuum in the house, one that Leonard seemed completely unaware of. The empty guest room and the lack of Jeremy's quiet presence in the kitchen or the garden left the house feeling cold, hollow. For me, though, it was a constant reminder of what I'd done, or failed to do. 3 days after Jeremy's call, I found him sitting on the back steps of the house when I returned from running errands. He looked tired, his hair disheveled, and his eyes shadowed with what I guessed was a lack of sleep. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "I needed to talk to you," he said, standing as I approached. I couldn't stay away any longer. Something about the way he said it made my breath catch. "Jeremy, can we go inside?" he asked, cutting me off. I nodded, leading him into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter as I set my bags down, his posture tense but his expression earnest. "I've been thinking," he said, after a moment, his voice low, "about everything. About us." "Jeremy, there is no us," I said quickly, though my words felt hollow. "Don't lie to me," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "We both know that's not true." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. Finally, I turned away, busying myself with unloading the groceries. "This isn't fair," he said, his voice breaking the quiet. "What isn't?" I asked without looking at him. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely, pretending like nothing's wrong, pretending like I don't feel the way I do. I froze, a can of soup still in my hand. "Jeremy, you don't mean that." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. I turned to face him then, my chest tightening. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? What you're risking?" "I know exactly what I'm risking," he replied, his voice steady. "But I don't care. You're worth it." His words hit me like a blow, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "You can't say things like that," I whispered. "Why not?" he challenged, stepping closer. "Because it's not right," I said, my voice trembling. "Because this isn't who we are." "Then who are we?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Tell me, Victoria, who are we pretending to be?" The truth was, I didn't know. The sound of the front door opening made both of us freeze. Jeremy stepped back and I turned away quickly, pretending to busy myself with the groceries. "Hey, honey," Leonard called from the hallway. "In here," I replied, my voice too bright, too forced. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, a folder tucked under his arm and a wide grin on his face. "Big news," he announced, holding up the folder. "Oh?" I asked, forcing myself to focus. "I just closed a deal on the first property for the rental venture," he said, clearly pleased with himself. "That's great," I said, my smile strained. He glanced at Jeremy, his expression shifting slightly. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "Just stopping by," Jeremy replied smoothly, his tone neutral. "Well, don't let me interrupt," Leonard said, patting Jeremy on the shoulder as he passed. "I've got some calls to make." As soon as he left the room, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I should go," Jeremy said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That weekend, Leonard decided to host a celebratory dinner for his new business venture. He invited a few close friends, insisting that Jeremy and I both attend. "You're part of the family," Leonard said to Jeremy when he hesitated. "And you've been a big help around here. You deserve to be included." Jeremy agreed reluctantly, and I found myself dreading the evening. The dinner started off uneventfully, with Leonard dominating the conversation as usual. He talked at length about his plans for the business, his confidence filling the room like a tangible presence. Jeremy, seated across from me, was quiet but attentive, his gaze occasionally meeting mine in moments that felt too charged, too dangerous. "Jeremy's been a real asset around here," Leonard said at one point, raising his glass. "I don't say it enough, but I'm proud of you, son." Jeremy's expression hardened, and I saw the tension in his jaw as he forced a smile. "Thanks," he said, though his tone was clipped. The night took a turn when Leonard, emboldened by a few too many drinks, decided to wax nostalgic about the past. "You know, Victoria," he said, his words slightly slurred, "when I married you, I wasn't sure how Jeremy would take it. But I think you've done a damn good job keeping this family together." I froze, my cheeks flushing as everyone turned to look at me. "And Jeremy," Leonard continued, oblivious to the awkwardness in the room, "I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done lately. You're finally starting to make something of yourself." Jeremy's expression darkened, and I saw the storm brewing in his eyes. I've always been something, Dad, he said, his voice low but firm. You just never noticed. The room fell silent, and Leonard frowned, clearly taken aback. What's that supposed to mean? It means you don't get to take credit for my progress, Jeremy said, his voice rising. That's all me. Not you. The tension in the room was unbearable, and I found myself gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. Jeremy, I said softly, trying to calm him down, but he wasn't listening. You've spent your whole life taking people for granted, Jeremy continued, his gaze locked on Leonard, and I'm done pretending like it doesn't matter. Leonard opened his mouth to respond, but Jeremy stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm leaving, he said, his voice tight. Jeremy, wait, I said, standing as well, but he was already walking away, leaving the room in stunned silence. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. The anger in Jeremy's voice, the pain in his eyes, it was all too much. Leonard, of course, brushed it off. He's always been emotional, he said dismissively. He'll calm down. But I wasn't so sure. And as the hours ticked by, I realized that things between us, between all of us, could never go back to the way they were.